Hello, I'm Carol.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and we're the Grief Gurus.
And grief is part of your story, but it's not your whole story. In this video, we are going to talk about time heals all wounds. I'm sure you've all heard it. Lisa, is that something people said to you?
Yup, in a word.
And is it true?
Nope, not
Yeah,
true. Not true.
it isn't, is it? And it's something I think people say because they don't know what to say. So it feels like a sort of comforting thing, just sort of give it time, you'll be fine. But that's not how grief is it? We have to learn to live with it and integrate it. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that time can be an asset to our healing and a driver, but it
Hmm.
has to do with what are we doing with that time?
Yes.
If 20 years go by and we're waiting to feel better and we're not doing anything in support of our own healing, then we may feel that there's a distance between the terrible experience of the loss and the shock of that. As time goes by, yeah, a little bit of time does ease the sharpness
Yeah.
of the edges. But
Yeah.
if we're not doing something to, or many things, I should say, if we're not, for example, looking at how we're caring for ourselves through fundamental things like sleep and nutrition and hydration, if we're not socializing in a way that we're trying to learn, how do we now, as you said, integrate?
Hmm.
How do we socialize without our loved one, whether it was, as in my case, my daughter or my son that died, or as in your case with your husband Brian dying?
Yeah.
If we're not learning how to re-engage without the people that we've lost, not that much is going to change. And then, of course, getting formal support where we can have our grief, as you and I talk a lot about, witnessed, where we
Yeah.
can talk about the memories, the good memories and the bad memories. But if we're just waiting to feel better,
It doesn't
time is
work.
not going to be a driver of healing.
And something I always talk about with my clients and with people is we have to be an active participant in our grief. And people
I
go,
love that.
oh, what's that? And it's really about allowing yourself to grieve is part of it. We have to have permission to feel those emotions, to be sad, to go through the gamut of pain, which it is very painful. And we have to think about how do we start living the life we have left. And I think that's what's missed in the time heals all wounds. Yes, it helps. Yes, it softens, as you say, but unless we do something to start stepping back into life, then we can really stay stuck in the black hole of grief, really, can't we? We need to take those steps. We need to mourn. We need to be brave enough to say, you know what, I'm going to go out with friends, or I'm going to start going back to work with maybe modified hours. But we need to start figuring out how do we hold our grief, allow time to soften it, and at the same time actively pursue coming back to life.
Yeah, and I think, the time frame for this is going to be different for everybody. It depends on the depth of the loss, it depends on a lot of factors. So it's not a matter of, if I just get through these couple of weeks or this couple of months. It's a very individual
Mm.
experience, but there definitely does come a time when we want to move from that acute phase of grief where, of course, in my situation, losing children, I wasn't, you know, aspiring to really get a whole lot done or to hurry up and heal or anything like that quickly. It took me, a long time to sort of
Oh,
re-engage.
yeah,
But we're not trying to rush you through that process. But I think what we're saying is at some point, we do have to step
yes,
back into life if we want to have a fulfilling quality of life, not despite our loss, but inclusive
yeah.
of the loss.
And I think you made a really good point there talking about acute grief. Of course, if you're in the first little bit of grief, you're not going to be thinking about what's next. Of course not. And as a reminder, David Kessler, who is a world renowned grief expert, said acute grief can be up to 2 years. And I think this
Mm.
shocks people because most of society thinks, oh, you're a year, you're probably good by now, you're back to normal. And of course, normal is different. And the relationship we had with our person is different for everybody. The way they died may have a big impact on how we grieve. And so there is no timeline. There is no 2 years and we're done, 5 years and we're done. So we have to be open to that, open to allowing for time to help us to be something that does help us with our grief, but also taking part in our grief. And I think that's more important to understand, integrating it and learning to live with it rather than just waiting and hoping that maybe it'll be better in another year and sitting there and not being better at all.
Yeah, exactly. And, with profound loss, a rule of thumb that I talk with folks about is, if you've lost that key person or someone in your true inner circle, a parent, a sibling, a partner, a child, a really good goal. And again, it's different for everybody, but I think it's really reasonable to say, it's going to take me a year. It's going to take me 365 days of going through all the firsts without that loved one. And, not telling you that it should take that long, but really understanding that the first day of their birthday that you don't spend with them, the first time you have a holiday without them, the first time you're stressed and you can't call them, all of these things, all of these firsts, they're exhausting, they're overwhelming. Some creep up on you, others you expect to be hard, maybe aren't as hard. But really, I think getting through a full year of all of these firsts is a good place to start with profound loss. And then, really recentering. And I've heard, I had a client recently mention this about how, I've heard that the second year is harder than the first year. And it was really intimidating her to, she may have read that on social media or something.
Yeah.
And I really do understand that, but really what we're talking about is not putting certain labels on timeframes or anything like that, but just to say, take your time, but also at some point that re-engagement piece is going to be really important. And there are a lot of different ways to approach that. Sometimes I think after, a profound loss, trying to learn a new skill or develop a new interest, again, not right in the aftermath, but if you've always loved horses, maybe you want to learn how to horseback ride. Or if you're, a music buff, maybe there's an instrument you want to learn. Letting our brains get exposure to new skills and experiences is part of the healing process, because again, it's that integration piece. We're still asking our brains to function, but maybe in a different way, and in a way that's not so woven into the loss and the pain of our loved one being gone.
Yeah. And I think it's worth saying it takes a lot longer than we think it's going to take. I mean, the loss of a significant other, they say, can take 5 to 8 years for us to come back to a sense of normalcy. That's a huge long time.
Especially when
when we hear that, then it's like, oh, so yeah, you need to take your time and you need to be active about it. I can honestly say it took me about 4 years to feel more like myself. That is a long time. So depends on so many things, as we've said, but remember, don't just wait, don't sit there and hope. Take an active participation, allow that grief to come along with you as you begin to live life.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the goal isn't to be without the grief as much as it is, I think, to get to know it. And I guess the other piece that I would love to mention here is just that when someone says to you, if you're grieving, when they say, well, time, heals all wounds, we might be inclined to be really angry about that kind of a statement. And you said something earlier about, the world sort of thinks, well, after a year, aren't you better? I would say the world or people around us, if they haven't been through this, will think that. If they've been through it, they're going to know that that's not the case. But we want to be gracious, if we can, around, when someone says something like that, it's just because they don't know what else to say. I remember after my daughter died when she was 13 months old, I had gone to a wedding of a dear friend within a couple of months after that loss. It was very hard for me. And one of the people that I saw there had said to me, and she was very well intentioned, but she said, yeah, I think you just need to stay away from babies for a while. And boy, that didn't feel comforting at all. It felt very kind of cold and almost critical, which is the way that we sometimes feel when someone says, you know, time will make it better. But we want to try not to brace against or bark back when someone says something that's painful, because it really doesn't come from a place generally of trying to inflict more pain. It's coming from a supportive place. So if someone does mention, you know, geez, the time factor, we want to be, you know, we want to let that roll off of us and not give it too much energy. At least that's my approach.
I'm with you on that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for checking out our video. And if you yourself have had an experience where someone said this to you, please share it in the comments, like our video, and more importantly, subscribe to our channel so that you can get our short videos and the long content on a regular basis. And check out the Grief Gurus if you want to hear more of these conversations. We'll see you next time.
Bye-bye.